In late 1989, the FBI made a significant announcement. They intended to equip all of their agents with a state-of-the-art handgun cartridge, the 10mm auto. Within a few months, a contract was signed with Smith and Wesson to produce the Model 1076 pistol, designed to fire this powerful new round. This move was seen as the dawn of a new era in law enforcement firepower, offering a solution to officers who felt outmatched by heavily armed criminal organizations. The announcement generated excitement among police forces, the media, and firearm enthusiasts alike. However, just 3 years later, the FBI abandoned the 10mm auto and canceled the Smith & Wesson contract, having received only a small portion of the guns. By 1997, nearly all FBI agents were issued the .40 caliber Glock, which became the standard law enforcement sidearm in the U.S. for the next 2 decades. Officially, the reason for the sudden shift was mechanical issues with the Smith & Wesson pistols. But the real story is more intricate and goes back at least a decade before the 10mm auto was even conceived. In 1972, Whit Collins, an editor for Guns and Ammo magazine, identified a noticeable gap in ammunition development for semi-automatic pistols. At the time, the .45 automatic Colt pistol was the dominant self-defense cartridge. With the 9mm a distant second, Collins questioned why no one had created a round that bridged the gap between the two. A .40 caliber bullet, positioned between the two in diameter, could offer unique ballistic benefits. Though there had been previous attempts, none had reached the stage of factory production. Unfazed by the lack of industry interest, Collins decided to develop the concept himself, introducing the .40 G&A cartridge. With the assistance of gunsmith John French, Collins used a 180-grain .40 caliber bullet loaded into a modified .30 Remington rifle case. They adapted a Browning high-power pistol to fire this new round, which achieved a velocity of 1,110 feet per second from a 4.7-inch barrel. The promising results were published in a 2-part series in Guns and Ammo, but after that, the project stalled. Despite the potential of Collins' idea, the handgun industry of the 1970s didn't see a market for an innovative semi-auto cartridge. In 1980, a 51-year-old Austrian named Gaston Glock was running a small side business from his garage, manufacturing knives and bayonets for the Austrian military. Through his military contacts, Glock learned that the Austrian army was seeking a new sidearm, and he asked if he could submit a design. Despite having little knowledge of firearms, Glock immersed himself in learning, consulting with experts to determine the ideal features for a military and police pistol. The following year, Glock filed a patent for his 17th invention, a polymer-framed 9mm pistol that was unlike any other on the market. Against all odds, the Glock 17 won the Austrian military pistol contract, marking Glock's entry into the firearms industry as a legitimate manufacturer. Although Whit Collins' .40-grain new arms project failed to impress the executives at major gun companies, it did capture the attention of Colonel Jeff Cooper, a renowned figure in the gun culture community. In the early 1980s, Cooper approached Collins to revisit the idea of a .40 caliber cartridge. However, Cooper wasn't satisfied with the original specifications of the .40 G&A. He believed the round needed more power, stating, "We shall require more power for our pistol." Instead of the 180-grain bullet traveling at 1,100 feet per second, Cooper proposed a larger case capable of accommodating a 200-grain bullet with a velocity of 1,200 feet per second. This new cartridge was named the 10mm Auto. The Swedish ammunition manufacturer, Norma, took these custom handloads and refined them into a factory-made cartridge. Their initial offerings included a 200-grain full metal jacket bullet traveling at 1,200 feet per second and a 170-grain jacketed hollow point at an impressive 1,400 feet per second. However, the high velocities proved to be tough on both the firearms and the shooters. Within a few years, Norma lowered the velocities to 1,120 and 1,300 feet per second, respectively. For the pistol, Cooper teamed up with the fledgling company Dornaus and Dixon, which based its design on a scaled-up version of the CZ-75. Unfortunately, the small company faced financial difficulties, and production of the Bren 10 pistol was repeatedly delayed. By 1986, Dornaus and Dixon declared bankruptcy, having shipped fewer than 2,000 pistols. This could have marked the end of the 10mm auto, but in 1987, Colt introduced the Delta Elite, a 10mm version of the iconic 1911 pistol. While it wasn't a full revival of Cooper's .40 caliber project, it ensured the cartridge remained in production for dedicated enthusiasts. Then on April 11, 1986, the FBI experienced one of its most tragic events during the infamous Miami shootout. 2 agents were killed, and 5 others were wounded by 2 heavily armed suspects. The incident became a turning point for the FBI and was labeled as one of the agency's greatest disasters. The shocking loss raised questions about how a top law enforcement agency could be so outgunned by just 2 criminals. The events highlighted flaws in tactics, as well as a low 15% accuracy rate, which pointed to deficiencies in firearms training. The media coverage contributed to the narrative that American police were increasingly outmatched by criminal forces. One of the suspects, Michael Platt, was responsible for most of the shooting, using a Ruger Mini 14 with 30-round magazines. The FBI agents, on the other hand, were armed with revolvers, 9mm pistols, and shotguns. The fallout from the Miami shootout prompted a rapid change in law enforcement tactics and equipment across the country. At the time, police departments were gradually shifting from revolvers to semi-automatic pistols, and the Miami incident accelerated this transition. While many departments opted for 9mm pistols from manufacturers like Smith Wesson, Sig Sauer, and Beretta, there was a new alternative available. Just months before the Miami shootout, Glock pistols had arrived in American gun stores. Glock aggressively targeted the law enforcement market, offering attractive trade-in deals. Gaston Glock, the company's founder, explained in an interview, "We assumed that by pursuing the law enforcement market, we would then receive the benefit of after-sales in the commercial market." Glock's strategy included selling their pistols to police forces at a significant discount, just $300 each, which was $60 below the wholesale price. By the end of 1987, major police departments in cities like Miami, Dallas, San Francisco, and Minneapolis had adopted the Glock pistols, cementing the brand's place in American law enforcement. The aftermath of the Miami shootout forced the FBI to reassess their weapons, ammunition, and training strategies. It became clear that a shift to semi-automatic pistols was necessary, but choosing the right model proved challenging. At the time, many agents were still using .38 special revolvers, and SWAT teams carried the 15-round 9mm Smith Wesson 459. 3 of the agents involved in the shootout were former SWAT members, still armed with these 9mm pistols. One of them, Jerry Dove, was able to strike Michael Platt early in the confrontation. The bullet passed through Platt's arm and entered his chest cavity, stopping just an inch from his heart. Although the wound was severe, it didn't incapacitate him immediately. If the bullet had penetrated further, Platt would have been unable to continue killing and injuring the other agents. This incident led to a reevaluation of wound ballistics, which up until that point had placed too much emphasis on bullet expansion, often neglecting the importance of penetration. In response, the FBI held a wound ballistics workshop in 1987, bringing together experts from across the country. They established new standards for ammunition selection, which included ballistic gelatin tests and a minimum penetration requirement of 10 to 12 inches. While Wick Collins was instrumental in getting the 10mm auto developed, he remained partial to his original concept of a shorter, lower velocity 40 caliber round. The 40 GNA project was revived, this time benefiting from the availability of 10mm auto brass, which was easier to modify than rifle cases. Collins discovered that by simply changing the barrel, a shortened and less powerful 10mm auto could be used in popular 9mm pistols. He renamed this new version of his 40 caliber cartridge the centimeter. Collins came close to getting Packmayer Gun Works to produce the centimeter commercially, but they ultimately rejected the idea due to the financial risk involved. However, Paul Liebenberg, the manager of Packmayer's custom shop, believed in the cartridge's potential. When Liebenberg later opened his own custom gunsmithing business, he began offering centimeter conversions for 1911 pistols. The cartridge gained traction, particularly with high-level International Practical Shooting Confederation competitive shooters. The centimeter was well-suited for IPSC because it offered lower recoil and higher ammunition capacity compared to the 45 ACP, while still delivering enough power to score similarly to 45s. One prominent shooter who saw the cartridge's potential was Tom Campbell, a close friend of Liebenberg's and an employee at Smith Wesson. If Campbell could persuade Smith Wesson to adopt the centimeter, it could have been the breakthrough Collins was hoping for. However, during the late 1980s, Smith Wesson was struggling as a company. The broader American gun market was facing difficulties, but Smith Wesson's situation was worse than most. Poor leadership, frequent ownership changes, and a slip in quality control left the company resistant to new ideas, such as a competition-focused cartridge. Smith Wesson had dominated the law enforcement market for decades, but as more police forces transitioned to semi-automatic pistols, many began choosing European models over the traditional American brands. At times, the company's management seemed completely unaware of the industry's changing direction. The threat of Glock, for instance, was brushed off, with one former marketing executive remarking, "The gun's uglier than a sack full of holes, who'd want it? It's plastic." This attitude reflected Smith Wesson's failure to adapt to the new realities of the firearms market. The FBI's new ballistics research program marked the beginning of an extensive process to evaluate various 9mm and 45 ACP loads in search of the best duty ammunition. However, Special Agent John Hall, the newly appointed chief of the Firearms Training Unit, introduced a third option into the testing, the 10mm auto. In the ongoing debate between 9mm and 45, Hall believed that the 10mm could strike a balance that would satisfy everyone. But right from the start, the ballistics lab found that factory-loaded 10mm ammunition was too powerful for a standard duty sidearm. The penetration was excessive, and the recoil was far too strong for practical use. Gun writers of the time were divided on the recoil of the 10mm, but even the most favorable reviews acknowledged that shooting it became uncomfortable after a few boxes of ammo. Given that FBI recruits fired 5,000 rounds during their initial weeks of training, the full-power 10mm proved to be too much, especially for novice shooters. To address this issue, the FBI developed a custom light 10mm load with reduced velocity, a 180-grain bullet traveling at 950 feet per second. This load reduced recoil to a more manageable level while maintaining enough velocity to offer superior penetration. After completing the testing, the so-called 10mm light emerged as the top contender, though it narrowly edged out 45 ACP loads in performance. Despite some resistance within the firearms training unit, Hall recommended that the FBI adopt the 10mm auto. Publicly, Hall argued that 9mm and 45 ACP were outdated cartridges with little room for further development, while the 10mm was a new round with significant potential for evolution. Privately, Hall admitted that, although he was personally a fan of the 45 ACP, he couldn't request funding for a 45 caliber weapon just after the U.S. The armed forces had transitioned from 45 to 9mm. In 1989, the FBI officially announced that the 10mm auto would become their new standard issue cartridge. But the question remained, which firearm would they choose to fire it? The FBI's options were limited. Sig Sauer seemed like an obvious choice, especially since the Bureau had been issuing 9mm Sig P228s to new agents and the P220 in 45 for those carrying personally owned weapons. Both models were popular, with the agency's pistol instructors favoring the SIG's double-action, single-action mechanism and the frame-mounted decocker. The guns were also known for their reliability and durability. A 10mm version of the P220 might have been just what the FBI needed, and it's rumored that the Bureau even asked SIG to produce one. However, SIG declined the request. Additionally, the FBI didn't want a single-action sidearm, which ruled out the Colt Delta Elite, a potential contender that might have been too expensive as well. Ultimately, the FBI turned to Smith Wesson, despite having first-hand experience with the company's recent decline in quality control. The pressure to field a new pistol quickly outweighed concerns about Smith and Wesson's capabilities, as they were the only remaining company with both the capacity to fulfill a large pistol contract and an existing large frame model capable of handling the 10mm cartridge. Smith and Wesson's existing 45 models were adapted to create a new, modified handgun. The resulting firearm was a hybrid of their 45 models, featuring a full stainless steel frame and a mid-size 4.25-inch barrel. Smith & Wesson replaced their slide-mounted safety decocker with their version of SIG's frame-mounted decocking lever. This new pistol was named the Model 1076, and the FBI signed a contract for 9,500 units. The Model 1076 would go on to serve as the FBI's standard-issue sidearm for a number of years. Despite some challenges and issues with the firearm's design and performance over time, behind the scenes, Smith & Wesson had more on their plate than just the FBI contract. At the 1990 SHOT Show in Las Vegas, they revealed the new 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge, but not as a competition round like Team Centimeter had hoped. When rumors spread that the FBI was planning to adopt a reduced velocity version of the 10mm, Smith & Wesson saw a golden opportunity. The 180-grain bullet at 950 feet per second, which was suitable for a shorter 40 cartridge like the Centimeter, seemed like a perfect fit. The company believed that police departments, upon realizing they could get a cartridge with the same ballistics as the FBI's load, but in a more compact 9mm sized pistol, would be eager to adopt it. Smith & Wesson saw this as their chance to reclaim their dominant position in the law enforcement market. They worked secretly with Winchester to refine the Centimeter into a 40 caliber round designed for the Smith & Wesson 59 900ths series pistols. After a few months of development, they were ready to showcase the new cartridge alongside the Model 4006 at the SHOT Show. Meanwhile, Glock was making waves at the same event. With the FBI's adoption of the 10mm expected to drive demand for the cartridge, Glock introduced their own large-frame 10mm pistol, the Glock 20. To mark the occasion, Gaston Glock himself made his first appearance at the convention. While Glock was a known name in the industry, very few people recognized the unassuming Austrian businessman, who reportedly took a handful of the new 40 Smith Wesson cartridges from Smith Wesson's booth. Upon examining the rounds, Glock realized that the 40 caliber could be fired from a Glock 17 with just a barrel change. Without wasting time, his company started production of the new 40 caliber Glock 22. It hit the market before Smith Wesson could ramp up production of their model 4006. Although the 4006 was released just a week later, Glock had managed to beat Smith & Wesson to market with the very cartridge that Smith & Wesson had created. While the delayed release of the model 4006 didn't have a major impact on sales, it was still a significant embarrassment for the company and a clear sign that they had underestimated Glock. The FBI, too, found itself in a difficult situation. As they received their first shipments of brand-new 10mm pistols, they quickly realized that the guns were already becoming outdated with the debut of the 40 Smith & Wesson. To make matters worse, some of the pistols had serious mechanical issues. While some worked fine, others experienced severe malfunctions. In one case, the slide on the model 1076 would get stuck in the closed position, requiring agents to bang on it with a mallet to open it. Though field agents generally liked the 1076, many others complained about its size and weight. The pistol that was meant to offer a compromise solution had become a source of ongoing controversy. The third-gen Smith & Wesson semi-autos were reliable and well-engineered in many respects. But the Model 1076 wasn't ideal for the demanding role of a duty pistol. Its design was functional, with a decent trigger and a slim grip, but it was heavy, weighing 46 ounces more than a 1911. Though its balance felt awkward and front-heavy initially, most shooters would eventually adjust. The recoil of the 10mm load was comparable to a .45 1911, with noticeable muzzle rise but not unbearable to shoot. However, the grip was too large for many users, especially with agents having various hand sizes. Even with larger hands, it was difficult to operate the slide release without shifting the grip. This sizing issue, combined with the clunky decocker, may have contributed to some of the mechanical issues the FBI experienced. While Smith & Wesson tried to address these issues, the process was slow, and the FBI continued to find new problems. The FBI's dissatisfaction with the Model 1076 grew, and it seemed they were looking for any reason to get out of the contract. Though the pistol wasn't inherently a bad design, it simply wasn't suited for the FBI's needs, leading to a sense of buyer's remorse and further complicating the relationship between the agency and the manufacturer. Smith & Wesson's struggles during the 1990s were a stark contrast to the meteoric rise of Glock in the handgun market. Glock's polymer-framed pistols not only offered a cost-effective solution, but also provided higher profit margins, 65% profit on every gun, compared to Smith & Wesson's much slimmer margins of 5 to 20%. While Smith & Wesson was scrambling to stay relevant, they made a desperate move by launching the Sigma in 1993, which was so similar to a Glock that many parts were interchangeable. Glock, unsurprisingly, sued for patent infringement, forcing Smith & Wesson into a costly multi-million-dollar settlement. Despite making modifications to the Sigma, the pistol was doomed from the start. It was viewed as a second-rate copy of Glock, and it could never shake its reputation. By 1993, Smith & Wesson's relationship with the FBI also hit a rocky point. After a string of issues with the 10mm pistols they had provided, including mechanical defects and dissatisfaction with the design. The FBI ultimately decided to cut ties. The Bureau ended up receiving only 2,400 out of the original 9,500 requested 10mm pistols. Many agents continued using the Smith & Wesson 1076 until the late 1990s. But the majority of the pistols were relegated to storage in the FBI's vault in Quantico. While the FBI's complaints about the 1076's reliability were legitimate, it's plausible that they also exaggerated some of the issues to justify moving away from the 10mm and towards the .40 caliber, which was beginning to gain popularity. Smith & Wesson's inability to pivot to a .40 caliber pistol at that time likely contributed to their decline in the market. Despite the growing success of the .40 Smith & Wesson cartridge, they never fully embraced it within their contract with the FBI. Meanwhile, Glock was quick to capitalize on the growing demand for .40 caliber pistols. And by 1997, the FBI officially adopted the Glock 22 and 23, which were chambered in .40 S&W, as their new duty pistols. By this point, many police agencies had already adopted the Glock 22, making the FBI's endorsement a bit of a formality. The Glock 22 would go on to become a staple of law enforcement sidearms in the years to come, lasting well into the 2010s. However, the .40 S&W cartridge's popularity eventually began to wane as the 9mm made a resurgence. Despite the .40's initial success in law enforcement, the 9mm's balance of performance, capacity, and recoil made it the more preferred choice for modern law enforcement. At the same time, the 10mm auto, once considered too powerful for mainstream use, saw a revival, particularly among enthusiasts and certain tactical units, further solidifying its place in the gun world. In the present day, Glock continues to dominate the law enforcement market with their pistols, especially the 9mm Glock 17 and 19. Smith & Wesson has managed to regain its footing in the competitive handgun market, offering polymer-framed pistols like the M&P series, which have gained considerable traction in the law enforcement and civilian markets. While the .40 caliber may no longer be the heavy hitter it once was, it still maintains a loyal following. As for the FBI, they ultimately transitioned to the 9mm Glock 17 and 19, acknowledging the evolution of handgun technology and ammunition. It's a full-circle moment. What once was a compromise, the FBI's adoption of 10mm, then .40 S&W, is now a departure to a newer and more widely embraced cartridge. The history of law enforcement pistols is a fascinating tale of evolving needs, technological advancements, and sometimes missed opportunities. It's ironic, though, how 10mm and .40 S&W have come full circle, once too hot to handle, now part of the mainstream, something that might have been hard to predict back in the 1990s when agencies like the FBI were in the throes of change.